Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode in Research Ethics series. My name is Hakan Ergül. I'm an associate professor of media studies and also research ethics lead at the Department of Culture, Communication and Media at the University College London. And I'm so excited today because I have with me Stephanie Chan. Hello, Stephanie.
Hello, Hakan. Hello, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us. We have started this podcast series almost like a year ago or so. But this is the first time that we are hosting a PhD candidate, and we are so excited. And I'm looking forward to hear your insights about your research and its connections to ethics. So let's get started if it's okay with you.
Sure, no problem.
Perfect. Okay. Stephanie, you are a PhD student, as I've just said, at the Department of Culture, Communication and Media, the same department with me. And you are doing some amazing work. And you have a very interesting background too. Can you give us a bit of some details about your research, what you're being sort of busy with at the moment?
Sure, no problem. So thank you for having me at this podcast series. I'm very excited to share my experience and my work and my PhD work with all of you. So I'm Stephanie and I'm from Hong Kong. So actually just give a little story of myself to start off so that you will understand why I come to do this PhD on primary music teacher identity. So actually, I am a classically trained musician, which I started my proper musical training on the piano at a very young age. So my parents and piano teacher recognized my musical talents when I was quite young, and they brought me a lot of opportunities in performing and also entering different competitions in Hong Kong and also overseas. So by then, I recognize myself as quite a good musician and quite a child that is quite good at music. So then it's very naturally that I've chosen music as my undergraduate study. So which I did my undergraduate in Hong Kong. I had a Bachelor of Music back in Hong Kong. And when I started to do my undergraduate, because as a performing musician, since my very young age, I always wanted to do something with performance. That's why when I, in my second year, when we need to choose our major stream for the undergraduate study, then obviously I need to go for performance because I am a musician and I'm good at music and good at playing the piano. That's why I need to go there. But then I failed in the audition. I didn't really do well. I didn't play well in the audition, and because of limited space for each cohort to do to go into the performance stream, so I didn't get it. Well, so this is the first time ever in my life that I struggle with my identity, because I feel like I have been always thinking myself as a good musician. Why couldn't I go into the performance stream and starting to do something that I like? So then my second choice for my major study was music education, because I've always enjoyed teaching people, and I always enjoy being with children. So after the first cohort of music education, I knew that that's the right choice, because it's all fascinating to learn about all the pedagogies and things. So this is the reason why after my undergraduate study, I came to the UK, came to ILE to did my MA. So after 1 year full-time MA in music education, I came back to Hong Kong for 3 years, and I worked in a primary school as a primary music teacher. But just give a brief contextual background about working in Hong Kong primary schools, because Hong Kong primary school music teachers are not all of them are music specialists. So we need to take up other academic subjects too. So for example, I need to teach English as well as music at the same time. So that's why when I started working at school, the identity struggle and negotiation come again, because I struggle whether I am a musician, am I a music teacher, or am I just a teacher? Because the work that I'm doing is completely different from what I learned from the MA in the UK, as well as very different from what I have been trained as a classical musician in my undergraduate study. So that's why all these experience and background gave me a great opportunity to explore what does it mean as to to be a primary music teacher in Hong Kong. So that's why I am very interested in identity development, especially professional identity development of primary school teachers in Hong Kong. So this is why my PhD research comes in as an inspiration of as a result of my personal experience.
Wow, that's amazing. What a brilliant, very rich background. Thank you so much, Stephanie. You have touched upon something really important, and you were talking about the identity. I think that's one key concept in your research as well. You have mentioned the struggles of you being once a musician, then the music teacher, now interested in those doing the same kind of profession, but as a researcher. So there is this shift, let's say, in your roles vis-a-vis to your research topic, but there is an also continuation in terms of interest into the music, very much.
Yeah.
We are going to get to that, but I'm just curious, and probably the audience might be curious too. So how are you juggling these 2-3 hats at the same time? Do you, for instance, have time to practice music? Probably not as much as you had before the PhD, because PhD is quite an invasive kind of activity. But tell us a little bit about that too before we engage with your research, which is very interesting.
Yeah. No problem. By the time my cat's here, it's here in the podcast with all of us.
That's wonderful.
I guess yes, as you said, as you mentioned, I got multiple hats with me all the time. But of course, when I'm doing my PhD, I do not really have lots of time to play music and play the piano. But I am very fortunate to be having some teaching opportunity back in Hong Kong, which I teach children on a regular basis, which I teach piano on a regular basis, which I had the opportunity to do music and to make music with the kids, which is quite satisfying to my musician self, because I do see myself with multiple identity right now, because I do see myself as a musician, I do see myself as a music teacher, but I am also a PhD student. So I guess it's sometimes about when I'm stressed about the PhD work, I will go off for some teaching to be with children and also make music with the children. So that it's really about juggling and also negotiating different identities that I am having at the moment.
Right. That's great. I think we have already entered into one of the most important aspects of any qualitative research, right? Which is positionality. Right. Yeah. And I'm really happy to hear that sort of biographic aspect, kind of your personal story behind. And very often in the qualitative research setting, we see that happening with the researchers looking back to their own lived experiences. And here we go. You have very similar experience with that too. So what would you say about that, being that you have this background as a music teacher, but also trained classical musician, and now the researcher, and you are in the field looking into very people that you can really resonate with, that you've been in their place, you've been in front of those children that they are working with, and you do know what it means to be into that identity. So do you once in a while, I think my curiosity is about, do you once in a while feel like, for instance, are there moments where your multiple identities are kind of competing, or like, let's say, replacing each other? That are there moments where you struggle with, are you a researcher or are you a musician, or are there those kind of sort of the tensions between those different ideas?
Yeah, I think I did have this struggle when I am literally in the field with the participants, because as you said, because I've been through all the situations, not exact situation, not exactly the same situation, but similar situations as the teachers that I interview with. So that I resonate a lot with their experiences. So that's why that I had to be very clear to myself that I am right now, I am a researcher instead of like one of those people who are still working with children, because I need to have that outsider point of view to look into the subject, or else this is one of the reasons, one of the very early ethical issues that I talk with my supervisor at the very beginning of my project is that the danger of researching myself for multiple times. Because literally when I am interviewing teachers with similar background, I do put a lot of pre-assumptions and also my personal experience into looking into their experience, which is actually, it could be quite different from what I feel, because their feelings might be very different from me. So this is one of the danger of having very similar post background as the participants in the field, because I need to be very clear to myself, especially during the interview and also the analysis process, that I need to know that I am a researcher instead of the music teachers who are working with them. So this is one of the challenges that I would say that I encountered in the field with the multiple identities that I have. Of course, there are advantages of like having all these multiple identities, because I shared a lot of similar experience. When I interview the teachers, I would be much easier to think about question or think about prompts for the teachers, because of my similar experience or the work that I have done. But that's again, there is a pros and cons in all these situations. The advantage is that I can do all these, but the disadvantage would be there would be so many pre-assumptions, and I am often very distant from opening up new things, because I thought what I experienced is everything. But then when the teachers tell me something new, some new information or new experience that I never had, that took me a while to digest and to realize that actually there are like many other teachers doing many other things that I didn't do. So I think there is really disadvantage and also advantages of having the multiple identities or multiple hats that in the research project.
Right, such important insights. This is easy to say, but I don't think that's so easy to sort of realize in practice, right? In the field research setting. I can imagine that. I wonder whether it was already, at the very outset, very obvious to you, and you knew exactly what you needed to do, or like it came, that insight, that wisdom came in time?
I think at the beginning, when I started to think about and design the research project, I really thought that like the skeleton would be this. Like I have already some pre-assumption of this would be the main theme, because I have already experienced all these multiple identity negotiation and things. But then when I really talked to the teachers, they all gave me new insights, which I would like to provide some more contextual background, because for my main participants, I got 10 participants in the main round. I deliberately chosen participants that do not share the same background as me. So because in Hong Kong primary school, music teachers, there are 3 groups of music teachers. One group of music teachers would be, they had bachelor degree in music and later on a teacher diploma in music, and then they go off for teaching. And the other group is that they have a bachelor degree in something else, but then they did a teacher diploma in music, then they go off to teach music. And then the last group is they did something for bachelor degree and they did something else for the teaching diploma, but because they know how to play an instrument, the school invited them to teach music at school. So that's why I want to explore how these 3 types of primary music teachers negotiate or think about their professional identity in their work. Because obviously I'm coming from the first group. I am a trained musician and I do have a teaching diploma in music, but then I do not really have a sense of what the other types of music teachers are experiencing in the field, because out of surprise, for example, in one of my primary music teacher that who didn't have any professional qualification in music, but she know how to play an instrument, went off to teach music. She struggled a lot in the first year, which it doesn't make sense to me, because I thought that's a new natural thing to just go in and teach music, but obviously it is different for some of the teachers. So I think it's very important to really to understand what is actually going on in the field, to understand more about the work of primary music teachers in Hong Kong.
Right. Well, actually, when I look at what you've just said, that you gave us this timeline in a way, like, how things are developing and unpacking when you're in the field. It's not obvious at the very, the first moment, all these things, but you learn as you continue your research, which means field research is a very dynamic process and it requires a continuous reflection, right? Mm-hmm. So you may cover some of those questions, for instance, in the ethics application that we all need to do before the data collection starts. Yeah. But it is extremely difficult to guess every single moment that you may encounter in the field, because without entering the field itself, because field is the one that teaches, to you, and then it's going to be the one that's going to define what the next day will bring to you as a experience. So let's go back to that and zoom into this really. And you've mentioned those difficulties and the learning in the field in a way. And let's, take us back to the moment where you are doing the interviews with your participants, for instance. And you've mentioned that, they had quite a diverse profiles. You have chosen them deliberately differently than your experience so that you have a broader perspective of experiences, individually, sort of education-wise, their background-wise. What were the challenges that raised some ethical concerns that kind of made you revisit the ethical questions that you had prepared before your research? And how did you go about those moments?
Okay. I guess the first thing that I really encountered in the field is power dynamics. So it is quite a surprise, because I did consider that in my ethics application, but I didn't know that it will come so strongly in when I was doing the interview. So for instance, there was a novice primary music teacher who just started teaching, and I invited her to participate in my research. After a while, she started off asking me advice during the interview, because she knew that I had so many not a lot of teaching experience, but I had more experiences than her. So that's why I do feel like that the power dynamic really shifts when I interview different profiles, different participants in the research. And for some senior teachers, they would, some of the teachers did give me answers that they would think that I want to know, instead of go naturally with the flow. So I think it's really about the power dynamics is really quite an interesting issue that I have been reflecting on, because that will really impact on the data that we collect, because especially when you are a researcher and you want to explore the research subject from more like an outsider point of view, it's very important to understand how power dynamics will play in the process. And I guess that's the first challenge that I experienced in the interview.
Right. Well, okay. That sounds so important to reflect on, really, the power dynamics, and then again juggling between different ideas in a way. But for instance, in my case, when I was doing my field research, I remember that since these were, let's say, semi-structured interviews, which means that there is a flexibility to go with the flow, and then let also the participant ask questions, or it's a conversation more or less, rather than a journalistic style of interview. And often the conversation was going somewhere that I didn't really expect or anticipate. And emotionally or experience-wise, there were those moments that I didn't really know exactly what I needed to do, but I needed to act upon in a way. Were there the kind of moments that you also came across in your fieldwork?
Yeah, I think so, because when I did my interview, I asked very loosely about the lived experience and how the primary music teachers experiences is in their teaching career. So some of them do come with strong emotions, but I would say mostly positive emotions, but some of the emotions are negative. So I guess handling the emotions of the participants is also a thing that I had learned in the interviewing process. I would say that I didn't do it well in the first few interviews, but when I started to know that, okay, when they reflect upon some of the experiences, for example, primary music teachers do have a lot of pressure in getting competition, winning a competition for the school. For example, when they lead a school choir, they go off for competition. The school would expect the teachers to at least get something back to the school as a recognition. So when they reflect upon these emotions, they had strong emotions because they are under a lot of pressure. So I guess as a PhD researcher, it was quite challenging for me to handle the situation, handle their emotions. But at the same time, luckily, because I had similar experiences, I know how it feels. So that it's sort of like showing my empathy and sympathy to them, so that they will know that they are not alone in this situation. I had this pressure as well. So I guess it's learning about how to handle emotions of the participants. It's one of the challenges that I face in the field.
Thank you so much. Such an interesting conversation, really. I have lots of questions, but we do not have that much time. So I'm going to slightly move the shift to the more practicalities of doing a research. And you are at the moment in the UK, you're writing up your thesis. That's the final stage of the PhD writing. And then you're doing that in English, right? But your field work is in Hong Kong, and then you conducted research in Cantonese. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes,
so,
that's correct.
That means, of course, lots of translation work.
Yeah.
And again, this is linked to the lots of ethical concerns within that, because whenever there's a translation intervening, there is always questions of to what extent you can be faithful to the, the participants' accounts, to what extent the cultural terms can be really translated, what is being lost within that space. Tell us a little bit about that experience and how you are handling that, because that's something really lots of our students are going through.
Yeah, sure. As an international student, it's really a struggle to think about translation and transcription. And this is one of the issues that I have spent a lot of time discussing with my supervisors and get their advice on doing the translation and transcription. Because as we always say, something must be lost in translation. And especially because I conducted all my interviews in Cantonese, which is a local dialect in Hong Kong. And we do have a lot of local slang, which it's so difficult to translate into English, and it's really a struggle because and it's also very time consuming to do the transcription and translation because I knew that from the very early stage of my research, I knew that I want to do it manually because I want to obviously I don't want to do my translation and transcription with online platform because there's a lot of like arising ethical issues that could happen. And I also think that doing manual transcription and translation do help me to build a connection with the participants, because when I was doing the interview, there was quite a lot of things that I missed. And when I listened back to the recording and doing all the typing and notes and handwritten notes on my notebook, I do have other insights looking into their experiences and into their data, which I think is very valuable and it's also a very good practice as a PhD researcher, because it's really helping me to get into all the nuances and details of the data and also the participant story. So I think the translation issue, it's really important. So what I did in my research is I have, as I said, it's very, very time consuming. I got 10 participants, and each case I spent around a month and a half each for the translation and transcription. What I did was to send, after all the translation and transcription, I sent that file to my participants to cross-check whether they are happy with the translation and whether I have misinterpreted in my translation, because sometimes when you try to translate one language to another, you sort of had your interpretation already. So that's why I gave the transcription back to my participants to check whether my interpretation and also my translation is correct. So, yeah.
Wow, that's such an interesting and really helpful insight, Stephanie. I think you've covered very well in the era of, let's say, all these AI fancy, going on. There are so many platforms promising to bring you the translations in seconds in, I don't know, 40 some languages, whatever you like. But actually, you touched on something really important, and you said that very clearly, that magic is in manual translation, because then there within that space, when you're listening, when you're underlining the words and then thinking about those reflections, that you actually relate to your participants, but actually the data become a living thing. So it's no longer a sort of written text from one language to another, but it becomes a lived experience, and partly also yours in that moment, because it allows you to reflect on. I'm just not sure about if I should keep that, each transcription took a month and a half out of the, the conversation, or not to sound too intimidating for the future PhD students. But no, I'm joking, of course. That's such an important thing, that this takes time. That's why we usually tell our students that if they say that, for instance, do you think that the 10 participants is too little? That's not little at all, if you really think how much it takes every step in the field work. Thank you so much for that, Stephanie. Are there anything else, any other tips, any other ideas that you would like to share for anyone who would like to do a kind of similar kind of research when it comes to the ethics preparation, for instance? If there's anything that you would like to share as the last minute of the recording.
Sure, no problem. I guess the little tips that I would give for my fellow future PhD student is to think about ethical issues sooner than later. I did know that when I was preparing my ethics, it was quite late stage, and I didn't know that it would take quite a long time to consider ethical issues, because I thought the ethics one, I thought the ethics one would be quite similar than the one that I did for MA. But actually, when you are doing like a PhD study, it's actually quite it's much more complex than just an MA thesis, a dissertation. So I guess it's really to allow yourself to have more thinking time about all the ethical issues, because once you think about those ethical issues, there will be like new ethical issues happen when you are in the field. So it's really important for us to think about all these issues sooner than later.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It was such a great pleasure to have you on this episode, and thanks a lot for sharing all these insights.
Thank you so much for having me, Hakan.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for watching, and I hope to see you in the next episode. Today it was Stephanie Chan with us, a PhD candidate at the Department of Culture, Communication and Media. I forgot to say at the beginning that Stephanie is also working with us at the Research Ethics Committee of the Institute of Education, doing such an amazing work. Thank you, Stephanie, and thanks everyone. See you in the next episode. Goodbye.